Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Susannah Gupta.
Thanks, Ray. This is the RayWenderlich.com podcast. Welcome to episode 5 for season 12. This episode was recorded on Monday, the 20th of December, 2021, for release on the 12th of January, 2022. This episode is sponsored by the beautifully clean slate of a brand new year. I'm your host, Dru Freeman, with my co-host, Susannah Gupta.
Thanks, Dru. This episode, we'll talk with Android developer, author, and mentor, Subhrajyoti Sen. Subhrajyoti is an Android engineer working with Keep Truckin', a San Francisco-based fleet management software company. He is an experienced developer, a Google Developer Expert, a GDE, an open source contributor, and an experienced author, editor, and course developer here at RayWenderlich.com. He joins us today from Bengaluru, Karnataka, India.
Subhrajyoti, welcome to the show. And please welcome, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much I have to ask this. Sorry.
There's going to be a slight delay between when we talk and we get responses, so we'll just edit those out.
Okay.
It is 2:30 in the morning there. How do you do that?
I just got used to it over time, and given that I'm from India and a lot of folks I work with tend to be from the US or time zones quite far away from India, I kind of got used to it over time where it's pretty easy if I'm awake late at night. It's very synchronous and I get things done pretty quick. So just got used to it over time.
So
And
do you
lots of
like,
coffee.
oh yeah, thank God for coffee. So do you switch like your whole schedule? Like, do you basically live on San Francisco hours, even though you live in a totally different, like almost opposite time zone? Or do you do it when you need to?
I do it when I need to. I work in the Indian time zone, so during the daytime here. It's just that depending on a case-to-case basis, whether it's working on books or maybe something at work, I sometimes work a little late as well, but I try to stick to the Indian time zone.
Okay, because that my follow-up was going to be, how does your family deal with this? But okay, I can see how. I mean, I still don't really get how it works, and I've got to say, for people listening to the audio and then thinking, "Huh, is he really awake? You guys should check out the video when it posts in a couple weeks because he looks great and totally awake." I could never do this, but thank you for
Very,
trying
very
it.
true. So can you tell us a little bit about Keep Truckin' a little bit so that we understand what they do?
Sure. So we create hardware and software solutions that lets companies manage the trucking fleet. So it could be figuring out where your different trucks are, communicating with them. And we also have hardware that lets drivers be safe. So we have AI-enabled dash cams that actually sees what's going on around the truck. Are the drivers driving properly? Are they braking too hard? Are they getting close to other vehicles? So it takes care of everything, like the driver's safety, where the drivers are, how do you communicate with them, like complete end-to-end solution for our fleet.
This
And
sounds really good.
This is all Android based?
So we have a bunch of things. We have Android and iOS apps. We also have actual hardware devices that connect to the vehicles. It could be something that monitors the stats of the vehicles, could be a dash cam. So bunch of different things, like an intersection of good hardware, software, everything.
Always a good combination to be able to unify hardware and software into a final product.
So what
Definitely.
part do you get to do?
I get to work on the apps, the Android apps, sometimes the one that the drivers use to update their location, the duty status, and things like that, as well as on the manager side of the application, where you can see where all your trucks are, your drivers are, see the location, are they in violation of certain rules, how many hours they can work more for this week or today, things like that.
Right, because
Mhm.
that's regulated. That sounds fun
Yeah.
and really important too. Like,
How long have
we've
you been? Oops, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've been for a while in this perpetual crisis of not being able to get all the goods that we need, like these supply chain issues. And this sounds like one piece in the puzzle that will help things go better. I mean, we need lots of pieces to still be fit together into that puzzle, but this definitely sounds helpful.
Yeah.
So-
We tend to, I would say, make a lot of things more efficient so that it's easier to get the things you want to you through the trucks, be it safety for the drivers or, making the entire process, I would say, smoother, like no delays, no maintenance issues, a bunch of things like that.
How long have you been with the company?
A little over a year.
And are they kind of new too? The company?
Not that new.
Okay.
So it's been like around 5-6 years, or a bit more than that. So I wouldn't say too new, but not like I would say very old.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how we judge it in this industry. And
Yeah.
is there like a whole office full of folks in Bengaluru? I want to keep calling this Bangalore, so please correct me if I
Sure.
screw up. Or are you like one remote guy and there are remote people all over the world in terms of dev?
So we have offices, like we have an Indian office, but we started out being a Bangalore-based office, but then with the pandemic and everything, we decided to be remote. So we have some of the engineers in Bangalore, but others are spread across India, so different cities. Same thing with the US as well. Like we have offices, but then a lot of people are remote as well. So we have kind of grown to adopt remote over the last year.
So are you more
makes sense.
comfortable in an office environment or in a remote environment?
Definitely remote environment. I have gotten quite used to this, and I actually like staying at home and working, and also the flexibility that remote gives you. It's been pretty good.
Yes, I would hate to have to be in the office at 2:30 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
Now, you are beyond working with Keep Trucking. You're also a Google Developer Expert.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Probably the same question you were about to ask. So what does that mean? And like, how did you become that? And then if somebody out there listening is thinking, I know a whole bunch, maybe I should be one. Why would you want to? What's the process?
Sure. So I'll answer this question step by step. So the GDE is actually the Google Developer Expert is actually a program by Google that kind of recognizes people who are experts in their field, but also have been contributing to the community. So it could be something like creating content in terms of videos, giving talks, writing a lot of tutorials, mentoring people, mentoring startups, or even contributing to different libraries, open sourcing things. So any way that you can benefit the community over time, and your community knows you as an expert. They believe that what are the things you are giving back to the community are actually helpful. It's just the final thing in the process is Google recognizing you as a Google Developer Expert. But I would say if you want to be a Google Developer Expert, you are an expert way before Google recognizes you because you have been contributing to the community.
So are you maybe in like a Google developer group to start with? Like how do you know your community knows you're an expert? I mean, you're contributing to open source, but how does that get recognized? And then is there some application process or?
Yeah. So there is an application process, but then you would have to approach the program. It could be through an existing Google Developer Expert or a Google employee. You can reach out to them saying that these are the contributions I have done, and I believe that I actually qualify for the program, that I have been contributing to the community. I feel that I'm quite well versed with certain part of Android or other technologies, like it could be web ecosystem, it could be machine learning. There's so many Google technologies out there.
Right.
So you approach someone to refer you to the program, and then you fill up a form, and then the interviews, and like a few steps there.
And after you become a GDE, are you basically a resource on a list that people can look to basically say, I need a GDE in my area, and here's a list of some of them?
Yes, there is actually a website called the GDE directory where you can filter by location and technology and find who are the GDEs for a particular tech in your area. That makes it easy for you to communicate with them, be it for, if you want a speaker for an event or you just want them to conduct a session where new developers can interact with them. So there's a directory where you can find all the GDEs in the world.
Do you have
Oh,
a
that's really cool.
specific technology you have that you said that the list actually says, this GDE for this technology. Do you have a specific technology that you've specialized in?
Yeah, so I'm a GDE for Android, since that's been my area of focus and my area of contribution as well. But you can also be a GDE for multiple categories. We have GDEs who are GDEs for Firebase, Android, Kotlin. There are people who are for 3 or 4 categories, but usually it's 1 or 2 categories. But then there are some people who have been contributing a lot and who are experts in multiple fields. So there is no limit up to how many categories you can be a GDE in.
And
Wonderful. Now you
I also have
go
to
ahead.
ask,
Go ahead.
sorry, when you became a GDE, or as you were going through the process, did you go back to Keep Truckin' and say, guys, I just want to let you know about this professional change that now I'm a GDE? And was there is that incentivized at work in any way? Of course, it's on your CV, yeah.
Yeah, it's on my CV, and I actually went to my manager, who was pretty supportive when I was actually applying to the program. And it was kind of, I would say, celebrated within the company. So this actually sent me a cake congratulating me, and it was shared on a company-wide channel that one of our employees is now a GDE. So they actually made it a pretty big deal.
That's really cool.
One
Yeah,
of the things I've always wished that Apple would do something to this nature, but
yeah.
there is nothing, as far as I know, within Apple for third-party developers.
I know, I
Now,
was reflecting on that too, because we had Jen on before, and she's active in she leads a Google developer group, and and now you're talking about the GDE program, and I was thinking that's a lot of really friendly, positive outreach and then recognition of expertise that's all coming through Google, and we don't really have something analogous on the iOS or Apple side.
no.
I mean, we
There
have
really
a
isn't.
friendly community, but there's not the formal scaffolding and structure in place
Yeah.
from Apple.
No. So, getting back to your experience, you also have been an open source developer working on several projects. I was wondering if you could. I'm sorry, I just had a call come in. I was wondering. Sorry, let me back up. You're also an open source developer, and I was wondering if you could talk about some of the projects you've worked on.
Sure. So I would say one of the projects I'm really happy that I contributed to was this app called Firefox Focus. It's a privacy-focused browser that was launched for some time. It didn't go on for too long. But then it was also one of the big open source projects that I worked with. So I worked on fixing a bunch of issues that were affecting, I would say, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So that was
Wow.
pretty cool that I was able to work on something. And then when it actually went out, I was able to see in the changelog that, these are the things I made. And it shipped out to maybe 1 million devices out there in the world.
That's
That's one of the
amazing.
main things. Yeah, it feels
How
great.
did you Okay, so we have a fair number of people in our audience who are newer devs, okay? How do you find an open source project to work on? How did you choose to work on Firefox Focus? And then once you started working on it, how did you pick, were there open issues and you're like, oh, this one looks good, that one looks good? How do you go about that when you're trying to get started in open source on Android?
So the way I actually approach projects is if I'm using something and I really like it, I go check out if it's actually open source. So in a lot of cases, a lot of apps or websites that you use might be open source. So if you really like it and you want to make it better, you can check if it's open source, and if it is, you can start going through it. See if there are any areas of improvement. And if you want to actually pick up new issues, so a lot of open source projects mark their issues as good first timer issue or low hanging fruit. So there are these different tags that projects tend to use, which signals to new developers that, hey, if you're new to this project, these are kept for you so that you can get your feet wet into this project. So I would suggest, if someone's new to open source, look for such issues and then start getting familiar with the code base progressively. And like sooner than you know it, you'll actually start writing more code for the project.
Oh, that's a really good approach that I hadn't really thought of, is just think about what you love, because then you're going to be so motivated, right? And then also, even if
Exactly.
there aren't a whole bunch of open issues, you're going to have some issues, because if you use it all the time, you definitely have a wish list already.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
works
think
out great.
that's one of the things about open source that I've always loved, is that we talk on the show about you work on this specific technology, and if we have Google or Apple listening in, what would you like to see them add? But in open source, it's a question of, this thing that I love and use doesn't have a feature I want. You can actually expand that and put this additional feature into a library that you use.
I really feel like
Um,
it's the promise and the good of what the internet could be, and what I perceived decades ago, like where we were starting with this, is like, let's all work together and make beautiful stuff.
All right. We've talked
I
about
have more questions.
Okay.
Sorry, I have more questions. I have more questions about personal projects. I don't know if this is the right point in the show, and I don't know if it was open source, but in learning more about you online, I noticed, and please correct me if I say these words wrong, but something that you've worked on, I think in an earlier part of your career, but was research on recognizing handwritten Indian languages, particularly Kannada. Am I saying that right? Um,
Close. Yeah.
please say it for me.
It's Kannada.
Kannada. And so there's a research paper that you worked on. And then I feel like there was also maybe audio recognition of, I don't know if it was Kannada or other languages. And I presume those were machine learning projects. I think the handwriting recognition one was, for sure. Can you talk about that a bit? And do you still work in that area? Because that sounded pretty amazing and useful.
So this was in the final year of my undergraduate program, where we have to create a capstone project as a team. And my friends have kind of found it funny that I can read and write Kannada because I've been in the city for a while, but I can't speak the language. So it's been a
Oh,
funny thing with all of my
fascinating.
friends. Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't grow up.
So
Okay, are you from a different part of India? So you didn't grow up speaking it?
uh, yeah, so I'm from the northeastern part of India.
Okay.
Then I moved to the eastern part of India, and then I would say the later half was in the southern part of India. So I didn't kind of grow up learning the language, but then I had to learn a bit about it in school. So that's why I can read and write the language. And that was like a funny thing between me and my friends. And we somehow came to the topic that, we should do something to contribute back to the language, since we have been part of this culture for a while. And we realized that there isn't much research on recognizing full documents written in Kannada. The research that existed was mostly around recognizing characters of a word or words from a sentence. No one took I would say, the full system where you could give like a whole page of written document and an algorithm would figure out what you have written. So that's what we wanted to take up. We had almost zero background in machine learning. We just had taken one course which
Oh,
gave us an
wow.
introduction.
And it's a super
Uh,
hard problem.
we were not sure what we were getting into, since like it's a complete novel field for us, but it took us almost a year. We were able to actually figure out ways of efficiently getting words and letters from sentences and getting sentences from a full document. So we had two parts of a research, where one was figuring out how do you take out all these separate elements from a full document while also maintaining the relationship. So The way with a lot of Indian languages is we have subscripts. So characters have subscripts, and there can be multiple subscripts. So separating out everything, connecting them back together, there were lots of things involved which no one really had tried before. Uh, it took us a lot of time, but we were able to figure out algorithms to do that. So that was one part of research. And then we put all that together to create this one machine learning model that could first figure out all the characters and then recognize all of them and then give you in Unicode that this is the text that someone wrote. So a full end-to-end pipeline.
Oh, that's so compelling. So did that go any farther? I see that you've gone somewhere different career-wise. Did that machine learning model get commercialized? Is there, like, if you've got a whole bunch of handwritten documents in Kannada now, can you use some software that'll turn them into text, turn them into Unicode?
We didn't have any plans for the project as such, but we always knew that we wanted to open source it so that other languages could benefit from it. And that's what we ended up doing. As soon as we finished our work, we open sourced it, and it has actually benefited other languages as well. So the same techniques have been used for Gujarati and a few other languages. We never commercialized it. We just kept it open that in case anyone wants to extend the research. We are actually happy that other researchers picked up this algorithm and they're using it. But I would say career-wise, all of us went different ways. Some of us went into backend development. I went into Android. So we never actually went back to the project, but we do update it from time to time so that it works for people.
Is
Oh, that's
Kannada
really
one of
cool.
those Is Kannada one of those languages where the letter order may change depending on what the word is? I know there are some languages where the letters, how you might spell out the word, are different than how it appears in the word.
There are slight differences there, like the same symbol could be like from the right of the letter or from the left of the letter, and it changes the intensity of the character. So if it's to the left, it could be E. If it's to the right, it could be E, like multiple E's together. So there are variations like that.
There are a lot of how many specific glyphs are there in Kannada?
I have actually lost track of it. I mean, it's been a while since I've worked on the language. So, it's been close to 3 years since we finished that project. So I don't really remember much from it.
But written, does it look totally different than Hindi? It's in a different script?
Yeah, it looks completely different.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. For a while, I was trying to learn Hindi, and my mother-in-law was trying to teach our kids too. And regrettably, it stuck with none of us in terms of written. Like, we speak teeny bits of it. Certainly, we know all the food words, and my husband knows all the Hindi and Punjabi words that have to do with parents trying to talk about their kids behind their backs. So that's really cool, though. And that the fact that you guys then open sourced it and then you maintain it too. So you understand open source not just as a contributor, but as somebody who's a maintainer and has published a repo. And that's a different side of it.
Yeah, because sometimes you get messages from people that they want to use it or how it's benefiting them. So I would say it's a good and fulfilling experience to also maintain something like that.
Computing for good. We can do this, you guys. It can be a thing.
Yep.
So let's see. We've talked about the GDE. We've talked about open source. Let's talk a little bit about mentoring. So you are also a mentor. What part of your career made you decide that you wanted to get into that position of giving back? Where did you hit that pivot point where you were like, I can give like I have been receiving?
So I would say it was around 1 or 1.5 years since I started working, I would say professionally full time, that I had interactions with these other engineers from the industry where they actually gave me different sorts of perspective on how I wanted to shape my career. And they were able to clear a lot of doubts I had regarding how I wanted to proceed. And I noticed that with just like maybe half an hour, 1 hour of conversation with someone, you actually gain a lot of perspective and get a lot of answers, which would be difficult to do on your own. And I hadn't received something like that before, which made me realize that there is a lack of this in the industry, both for, I would say, working professionals as well as students. And I realized that I have been, I would say, in a lucky or privileged position that I have access to these people and people have helped me out. So I just wanted to reciprocate that and give back to the community. So people who might find it difficult to find mentors, I just wanted to do my best so that, even they could get some answers that they were seeking, especially students in maybe the final year, pre-final year, where they're trying to figure out things. Uh, Whatever I know, whatever I have learned over time, maybe I can share it with them and, help answer some of the questions. So that's when the change happened for me, that even I can start making a difference for people.
Did you have
So
a
now-
mentor that stood out for you?
Yes. So, I mean, I can give them a shout out. So it's someone named Saket Narayan. And he actually was the one who pushed me into giving talks. So he knew that I was contributing to open source and he pushed me into giving talks. So it started with meetups, then with conferences in India, and then international conferences as well. So that initial nudge is what gave me the direction. And also, whenever I would go to such conferences, I would have that imposter syndrome where other speakers, I would say, pretty accomplished people who have been in Android for like a decade. And that's when he would reassure me that, I'm also on my way there. I might not have a decade worth of experience, but also I'm trying to do the best I can. And I'm learning as well as sharing what I'm learning. So that also matters a lot. So those are the things that have actually, I would say, made a lot of difference in my career. Without all of this, I don't think so I would even be a GDE.
So did you seek out having a mentor? I mean, how did you, before you started helping others in this way, how did you end up getting a mentor relationship?
I realized that I would have to reach out to people on my own. Otherwise, you can't really make any sort of connections or get talking to people. So I started reaching out to people during meetups or on Twitter, where a lot of people do this, where they keep an open calendar where you can, book sessions with them and have a chat. So I started to do that with a lot of developers who are way senior to me, as well as talking to people during meetups and conferences to get understanding of things. That's how I approached it. But then I realized I was also hesitating a lot to approach them. And if I'm also hesitating, I know there are lots of people like me who would be hesitating. So that's what actually gave me the understanding, okay, there is something here. And that's how I started as well. Like getting over that initial hesitation to contact someone is the first step.
And then, okay, so let's say you get over the hesitation. You're like, okay, this is it today or this week. It's on my to-do list. I'm going to contact somebody. What do you ask them? What are those initial conversations like?
So the way I started out is I give a small introduction about me to give them some background that, hey, I'm an Android engineer or I'm a student in college trying to figure out Android. So a little bit of context so that they can tailor their answer to you. And then I would ask them, would they have time for a few questions? Or sometimes I wouldn't want to waste their time. So I would like make a few small questions and send it along with the message so that there would be less to and fro. But then I would say, introduce myself and I would get straight to the point so that it's easier for them to answer as well. That, hey, like maybe I am facing through some imposter syndrome and I've seen you talk about it. So how did you deal with it? Or I'm trying to get into an Android job without actually having a formal CS degree. I've been a computer science degree, so how should I approach it? So I would say give some context and get straight to your questions, because people like receiving such questions where they can get straight to the answers.
And it sounds like the questions that you're asking are not so much technical questions, and the term we've been throwing around is soft skills. It's how do I make those connections? How do I take myself to the next step? Is that correct?
Yeah, because for technical, you have technical questions, you have Stack Overflow, you have a bunch of forums where you can get in touch with people. But for non-tech, figuring out that career perspective, like those career objectives, that's very subjective. So you can't really go to a forum that's very objective and get answers there.
So how do you put yourself forward as a mentor before, like, now that we have this podcast, of course, people will know, oh, that guy's an Android mentor. I should reach out to him. But before the podcast, how would people know that you're a mentor, and how do they find you?
So I created an open calendar, and then initially I would say I didn't tell people about it. It was just in my Twitter handle. I never really thought too much about telling people about it, but then I slowly saw that people were actually working slots on their own. And then I realized that I should be talking about it. So what I tend to do sometimes is, if I'm giving a talk at a meetup or a conference, at the end of it, I also plug in the link saying that I also do these mentoring sessions, which are completely free. You can go here and book a slot. If you want to talk about anything Android or early software engineering career, please go ahead. I also put the links on all my social media, like on my website, LinkedIn, Twitter. So if anyone's like reading anything about me, it's easy for them to discover the link.
And so, without divulging anything personal about any one person, tell us about some of the people who've booked sessions with you. What are the sessions like? What have people asked? Have they asked anything unexpected?
Uh, I would say it has been a quite diverse experience. So I usually the audience is mostly students trying to figure out whether they should be doing Android or something else. Uh, it can also be people who are having, I would say, a lot of the fear of missing out, where so much technology is being released in the Android ecosystem. How do you keep up? And how do you keep up with your personal interests, your work stuff, and also these things coming in? So how does someone, like, construct a framework that helps them prioritize things so that they can learn without getting exhausted? But also the other end, I have had someone, again, I'm not mentioning the name, but the person was actually a copywriter with no tech background, but she wanted to get into tech so that she could make more money and provide a better education for her child. So that was, I would say, a pretty different experience for me. Someone with no tech background at all, but someone who had a reason to get into tech, that motivation that would push them to get into tech, learn about Android, and later on get an internship or a job. So it's been, like, I would say, it's a pretty wide spectrum of people whom you can help out.
You've listed one of my favorite topics, which is especially harsh in this podcast world, and that is fear of missing out due to so many technologies. How do you
Yes.
do it? How do you keep up with all the technologies that come out?
I realized that I can't really keep up with everything, and even if I somehow could, I'd be pretty exhausted by the end of it. So I have this sort of, I would say, framework where I figure out how important it is, how important is a topic to me right now versus how important it might be 2-3 months down the line. Now, for example, if I have a library or a certain, I would say, sort of software pattern that I need to use as a part of my day job, maybe 2-3 months down the line, I won't go into it right now. I will learn about something right now that interests me, and know that 3 months down the line, when I start working on that particular feature, I will eventually learn about that particular tech. So getting that, I would say, accepting the fact that you don't need to know all of the things right now, but it's completely fine to learn things as and when you need them. Like, for example, when Jetpack Compose came out with Android, I I was actually facing that fear of missing out because everyone else was creating projects. But then I realized eventually at some point I would be using it at my work. So that would give me good time to learn it. And I didn't want to, like, constantly put effort into learning it as and when the different versions were being released. So I focused on other things that time.
I remember when shifting over to my world, when Swift was first released, I took about a year or two before I actually jumped on the bandwagon, not because I had any doubt that the bandwagon was something to be jumped on, but just simply that I had so much on my plate in older code that it wasn't the right time. But in retrospect now, I'm fully where I need to be on that path. Um, I'm assuming that you also find that technology that you need and you completely do a deep dive into it.
Yeah, like, if you learn things at the right time, you also get that time to dive deep into it. If you try to keep up with a lot of tech, it's difficult to get into depth. And
Yes.
as you I would say growing your career, depth is what matters a lot instead of knowing a lot of different tech but not understanding them deep. So that's why you wait for the right time to learn the right tools and technologies.
That's well said. So, what did you tell the gal who had no background at all in tech? What was your advice for her?
I would say it wasn't like a single session. We worked as a part of a mentorship program over, I think, around 6 to 7 weeks,
Oh,
where
wow.
I actually, I would say, work with them on projects. I would tell them that, okay, this is a very skeleton structure that you can create. They would do that on the week one. I would give them resources to learn about those particular things that they needed to work on those particular features. And then over 6 to 7 weeks, I would guide them into little more advanced topics. Okay, like first you create this part of the app, you take input, you do this sort of calculations, and I would review the code as well. So I got them used to GitHub pretty early on. They would push the code, I would review it. To also give pointers to, like, if you are applying to an internship, what are the things they look for in your code. So I would give them that perspective as well, because that was their main goal: get into an internship and then eventually a full-time job.
Um, that's amazing. So you're basically creating like a personalized boot camp on the fly for this person who happened to write into your social media. I mean, they must have felt like they won the lottery. So are they now working actively in tech, or are they still in the process of learning, or kind of both? I mean, we're always in the process of learning.
So this was, I think, almost a year ago. Last I checked, they were still learning. I still have to catch up with them. But in terms of the bootcamp thing that you mentioned, there are these actually different programs, especially for people from underrepresented communities, which connects them with mentors to work on different technologies. So this was through one such program.
And do you want to say what the program is in case it applies to some of our listeners?
Sure. So there's this program was called Woo Tech, WOO Tech. So Women in Tech. So Woo Tech. I'm not sure if it's still running, but most likely they are. And there are other such programs as well, which actually connects people learning, getting into technologies to mentors. So you can look up Woo Tech, but there are others as well.
We'll
Yeah,
make
that
sure
sounds
that that's,
great.
of course, in the show notes.
Yeah, we've got all sorts of neat stuff to follow up on for the show notes for sure. And I just have to ask, because you mentioned it, and I'm curious, and I'm sure some listeners are too. So when you have your learning project, your personal project that you push to GitHub, and you tell employer for the internship, oh, look at my personal project. So what are they going to look for in that project? What are they looking for in your code?
I would say for Android applications, they would look for, I would say, some common issues, things like whether you're trying to make a network call on your main thread, uh, and how you are structuring things. If you have comments, no one really, I would say, looks for advanced things like architectures and testing. If it's mostly an internship, but rather whatever you have done, how well have you done it? Is the code structured well? Are things written in a way that can be understandable? Like, instead of naming your variables A, B, C, D, you're giving them actual
Right,
legible names. Okay.
right.
And like, have you put in a little effort in the UI? So instead of having a very bare bones API, a very bare bones UI, have you put a little color, like, played around with the colors, made the buttons look a bit nice? Like, a presentation also matters, since they don't expect you to have a very advanced app, but whatever you have done well.
Okay. Well
And this
said. And I think
is
that's heartening, actually. That's as somebody who feels, I mean, I'm like a perpetual beginner, and I always think like, oh, this is the app I want to write. That's the app I want to write. And it seems so daunting, but that do well what you intend to do. That's good advice, probably beyond just mobile development.
which,
Yeah.
of course, makes me somewhat ill to my stomach, because I actually released my code of my own personal project to somebody to evaluate today, and this code has been 7 years in the making, so it's got some very
Wow.
inexperienced code in it, and it's got some experienced code, and somebody's going to look at it and try to figure out what I was doing, and I'm just like, oh boy.
Also, it's super great though that you've got like that somebody's going to do that. Like it's great for you that you're brave and taking that leap, knowing that some of the older stuff is not going to be ideal, and they're going to hopefully say that. Um, and it's really great you found somebody who's willing to do that, because
Yep.
that's a big project.
Yeah.
It's a big jump. So, Subhrajyoti, at this point, do you have a personal project that you're working on in your spare time?
No personal project. I am mostly just working on some Ravendlic projects. But then I'm trying actually to, I would say, take some more time for myself, to do things other than tech. Because I've been in that, I would say, the tech hustle for a couple of years where I was just pushing to learn more and more, share more. So I felt it was time for me to actually take some personal time and work on things like read more, go into the nature more, cycle, and things like that. So nothing much on the tech side right now.
Oh, you've given me two topics to branch off on. So we'll back away from tech for a minute. And we'll ask. So you like to cycle. What are some of the other things you like to do that are not attached to a computer?
So I like to read nonfiction. It could be almost anything. Could be something related to finance, economics, travel. I wanted to cycle as well. So recently I just went ahead and got a cycle, and every alternate day I cycle around 10 to 20 kilometers.
Nice.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I really wanted to do that for a long time, and finally I have the time. So I do that. I go on more hikes on the weekends. So different places, go to maybe nearby cities or nearby hill stations for a hike. Trying to, I would say, learn new things. For example, swimming. Uh, just trying out different things to see, what are the things to explore out there and what can I learn.
We talked about this last week. Sorry, on the last episode. Do you have a wearable that you use since you have the hiking and the cycling? Do you have a wearable?
Yeah, I do use one. It's the Amazfit Pace. Uh, it's I would say it's pretty good for tracking my the cycling trails as well as my hikes, because it remembers a map of wherever I have been.
Oh,
Oh,
So
nice.
even if I don't have my phone with me, I can just look at the watch and figure out how should I head back home in case I get lost.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, that sounds really useful. I was going to ask, like, okay, from where you live, how long does it take you to get to a hill station that's pretty for hiking?
Overnight. So if I catch a
Okay.
bus around, I think 8 or 9, I should reach there around morning.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking it's like kind of far, yeah, but worth it because beautiful, right?
Yeah, especially in southern India, you have a lot of places you can go on hikes.
That sounds lovely.
Someday
And
I
then
will
what
make it
about
out
with
to
the
India.
biking? Can you bike? Like, are there decent trails for biking pretty close to where you live, or do you need to put your bike on a train or in your car and go somewhere?
So I would say the place I stay at right now, the nearby, I would say the area is pretty well made. So I can just cycle around regular streets since there isn't too much traffic. But recently they've
Good.
also started creating the cycling lanes along the main road. So you don't have to
Nice.
get into main traffic, but rather you can just cycle to the side safely.
Right on. This sounds really good.
And healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Healthy
the main motivation.
physically and mentally, and I think getting out in nature it's restorative and it's good for us. It's good for our creative minds too. Like we need it when we come back to the computer, or we come back to our sketch pad, or I mean, for me, it's an iPad, like where you're thinking about, okay, what do I want this app to be? What's the flow? What do the screens look like? You need that time away from that I think, for your brain to work optimally.
Now,
Yeah, so whenever I get stuck with a work problem, I just take my cycle, go for a round, come back, and then usually I know the solution after that.
Right
now I
on.
said there were.
Brains
Oops,
are
go ahead.
amazing.
Now I said there were two ways I could go with that one. The other one was that you mentioned Ray Wenderlich, that you've been working on projects there. We know you've got the book coming soon. Now, this is not your first book with Ray.
No. So before this, I worked on the real world Android Pay tutorials book.
Did you worked on saving data?
Yeah, I worked on the second edition on saving data on Android as well.
And that was with Jen Bailey, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think she was in the first edition, but the second edition was handled by someone else.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
So, and now you've got the new one that's going to be coming out shortly-ish, which
I
is
think we're saying first quarter of next
first
year.
quarter of the year, and that's Android app distribution. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. So this book is meant to be that I would say that one guide that helps anyone who is unfamiliar with the release process of an app, but also people who have done it before but might find new things to learn about. So it actually the book is split into three parts, if you think of it, because release itself has three parts. One is how do you get ready for the release? What are the things you have to do in your app to make sure it's ready to go out into the world and in the hands of users? So that's the first part. The second part is actually putting it out on the Play Store, creating those listings, figuring out what are the answers to give, uploading your actual app to the Play Store, waiting for the reviews, etc. And then once it's out there, how do you improve on things? How do you monitor how your app is performing out there in the real world? How do you, I would say, nudge people to actually review your app so that more reviews and ratings you have, the better perceived the app is. So it actually takes you the full life cycle of thinking about releasing, and taking care of it after releasing.
Does the book go into any of the monetization, like in-app purchases, or is it just strictly getting it out there?
It's strictly about getting it out there. Monetization is not something that covers.
Yeah, we were noting in the iOS world also that's something that could be discussed more. But I think just the how do you get it out there and what are the mechanics of that and the considerations, and then how do you get more reviews? Like there's so much to this that's really, I mean, it's absolutely key to succeeding as an app developer. And yet it's, it's rarely talked about. It's more like, okay,
Yeah.
read whatever documentation you can, ask in the Slack channels, and good luck.
Yeah.
So what things have you learned as during the process of you're the tech editor on it, right?
Yeah.
What things have you learned in the process that were new to you or surprising to you?
So one thing I learned was, I would say, more about the Play console, the dashboard that we have. I didn't really know a lot of the options existed before I started working on the book, because there are too many options and it's pretty easy to get lost in there. So that's where the book came in helpful for me, where I was actually able to learn, okay, that these options exist and I can actually use them to improve my app. Things like seeing how the app has been performing on different devices. You can set up alerts in case the recent versions are not performing that well. I had no clue that you could set up an alert. I know that you could look into some data, and I didn't know there was like, way of getting to know automatically if something's wrong. Also, things on getting the app ready. I was doing something wrongs in my app till the time I read the book. It's around creating different versions of your app where something could be free, something could be paid, could be something for just for development, something could be for production. Like, how do you create these different variants? I was actually
Right.
using a very manual way of creating variants, but then the book actually showed me a good way of creating some sort of a structure that automatically created those for you. So I got to learn a lot as well.
Oh, this sounds really good. Yeah, I think people, it sounds kind of like everybody working in Android's going to want a copy of this. It's not just, clearly, it's
Definitely.
not just a beginner dev kind of book.
No, we have tried to keep in topics that are good for beginners, but as well as if you have been doing it for a while, there are things you will still find interesting.
Good,
Let's
good.
take a moment to plug some of the team. Who are the authors on the book?
The other authors on the book was, I remember, the other author was Haroon, and then there was also Fuad. So we three were the authors. The FP was Gabriella.
Mm-hmm.
I am unable. Oh, I'm so sorry. I told out the authors for the Saving Data on Android book. My bad. Uh, it just gets confusing with all the books. So uh, I think on this book it was Fuad
Mm-hmm.
and Ivana. They were the authors. I am one of the tech editors. The other tech editor had to, I would say, move out because of some personal commitments.
Mm-hmm.
And the FP is Lance.
And then who's your English language editor? Is it Sandra or?
I think the English language editor for this was April.
Okay.
It kind of gets difficult to keep track of all the books, and with all the teams that I'm working on, it kind of gets blurry about who's working on which book.
And you said that you're going to be taking some tech time to yourself after this book is out. Is that correct?
I'm working on one more project with Ray Wonderlic, but other than that, I'm trying to not pick up anything new.
That's the world of Ray, where somebody looks at you and goes, "Would you like to do something else?" And you sit there going, "Well, okay."
Yeah,
Because it
yeah,
always sounds fun. Whatever the ask is, it's like, oh,
exactly.
but that sounds fun. So,
That's been a
what's
good
the
part of my.
other
Sorry, go ahead.
what's the other project you're working on here at raywonderlic.com right now?
So I'm working on a video course for using material components to animate parts of your app, as
Ooh,
well as a book on Kotlin multi-platform. So those are the two main things.
Very nice.
just that and tech editing the other book. So just those
Yeah.
three things.
Just
Yeah.
those three things. Nothing very much.
Well, that all sounds really cool.
And I would say it's been good to be a part of Ray Wonderlic in that aspect, where I got to do a lot of things I didn't know that I wanted to do or could do. I just initially started out writing tutorials, then editing, and then I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't think I could. But with the team's help and everyone being so helpful, I started working on books and video courses as well. And I never really thought that I could actually record, edit videos, and make them publishing worthy. So with the help of the different teams at Raven, it's been like, I would say, a good discovery journey for me to figure out what are the things I can do.
It's
Oh.
really wonderful, the support structure that's there. We spoke with the WatchOS folks last show, and they talked about the fact that they came in knowing very little about the topic at all, and actually having a general, almost apathetic look at the technology. And then they tried it, and it basically washed over them. Do you find that's similar with you, that when you dive into something new, that technology just sort of washes over you?
Yeah, definitely. While working on the real world Android book, there were some topics I was pretty new to as well. But I knew that those would be valuable to developers and valuable to me as well. So once I dove into it, with the team's help and everything, it just turned out really great. And I got to learn in that process.
One of the things that I found really neat here that is I've been involved in teaching and content creation in different ways my entire career. But here we really sincerely want those of us creating content to feel good about it, to feel good about the process. Like truly, we say like, oh, it should be fun working on a book, but then there's active management that happens to make sure it really is fun. And it's not just lip service. It's like, it should be fun, but okay, give me your deliverable, give me your deliverable, give me your deliverable. I mean, yes, you do have to do the work you committed to, but also the people are nice and there's room to learn. And nobody says, hey, that question is stupid. They'll answer patiently. And I'm proud of this organization for really, supporting us as we learn and then help others learn.
From books, video
Definitely.
courses, tutorials, all the way down to even podcasts.
Where people who know absolutely nothing about it can be invited on as seasoned co-hosts. So yeah, it's pretty great.
Right. Sue, what do you have to move forward?
So we're recording this. This is the last episode we're recording in calendar year 2021, although it's going to broadcast in 2022. What are you looking forward to in the world of Android development in this coming year? What do you think is going to get bigger? Are there things you think are going to fade away? What are some of the technologies that you're watching as we go forwards?
I would say the main thing that I'm excited about is Kotlin multi-platform, where you could share a lot of code between your apps. That's something I'm exploring at work as well as working on that book with the different authors. And it's something that I believe will make developing iOS apps a better experience, because at least what I have seen that uh, given the technology that exists like Android and iOS, given that Android is a bit more open and a little more accessible in terms of the hardware requirements and things like that, there are more Android developers out there. And sometimes it causes a difference in pace when working on projects. Since there's more availability of Android, you can get Android part of things done pretty quickly compared to iOS, just by the sheer number of people that can work on the projects. Now, with multi-platform, a lot of the, I would say, the shared code can be written by the Android engineers, and that kind of speeds things up if you have less iOS folks on your team, because that's something I have seen happen in teams where it's been difficult to hire iOS engineers, but easier to hire Android engineers just because of the availability. So it would change the way we think about team structures, how people perceive themselves as engineers, where people think that I'm just an Android engineer or just an iOS engineer. People will soon start becoming more mobile engineers, where they will work a bit on both iOS and Android. And that's something I feel is a very good shift for the industry. And it will also keep things interesting for people in the long run.
Okay, interesting. As somebody very interested in iOS, I don't know if I should be concerned or maybe just start getting ready to read that Kotlin multi-platform book. But it sounds like that's a technology that we need to keep an eye on. So are there certain
Definitely.
areas of Android learning that you think will be less important as we come into this new year? Are there things that will go by the wayside?
I would say certain things would become easier. So it would have, I would say, a less learning curve. Things like how you style and theme Android apps. Traditionally, it's been pretty complicated. You have to do a lot of work to style and theme things properly, understand how colors work. There are a bunch of things that get into play, and I would say a lot of us are still trying to understand how things work. But with technologies like Jetpack Compose coming in, that learning curve had been smoothed out a lot. It's easier to style and theme your apps. So I would say the traditional way of styling and theming won't be needed as much going forward. So it's actually good for everyone that you don't need so much time to understand how things work, but things are simplified for you.
Yeah, that does sound good. That does sound good.
Yeah.
Talking about the Kotlin multi-platform, we're talking just about the base language itself, if I'm understanding this correctly. We're not talking necessarily about the API calls into the different libraries. Is that correct?
So there's more to just the language. You have different APIs which can be unified. So like both the Android and iOS code bases call the same method in the Kotlin multi-platform code, but internally it figures out which platform it needs to use. So there could be a different implementation for something on iOS and different implementation on Android, but then there's a common interface to work with it. Internally, it figures out like for on I think on iOS you have the key store, the keychain to store secrets or some sort
Mhm.
of
Right.
confidential information. On Android, it would be the key store. So you could have some sort of common API that says like secured storage. But
Mhm.
internally, once you call it, depending on Android and iOS, it can figure out which one to call it.
Right. Sort of a
So,
linker level type shim.
I'm
so as
not really
somebody
too
who's
familiar with shims, so
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I'm not sure either, but as somebody who's outside of the Android world, contrast for me Kotlin multi-platform and Flutter, because both of these seem like ways that I can write one set of something that's not iOS specific code and run it in different places, including on an Android mobile device, including on the web, including on my iPhone or iPad. How are those two things different?
that's a pretty good question, actually. And that's something that comes up quite often as well when people discuss Kotlin multi-platform. So When you think of Flutter, it's, I would say, a common toolkit or common framework where even the UI is unified. So you write
Right.
one code that actually is the UI for both the Android, iOS, web, etc. So you don't need to separately write separate UI for different platforms that you're using. One UI code renders on everything, which makes it very easy and very quick to deploy apps.
Yeah, it's super
But then the
exciting.
thing, yeah, but the thing with that is you would have to learn these new way of writing UI. Now, as an Android and like if you're an iOS developer, you'll be pretty familiar with Swift UI.
Right.
As an Android developer, I'll be pretty familiar with Jetpack Compose or other ways of creating views, right? So what Kotlin multi-platform does is it creates some sort of only small part of the code, things like storing data on your device, making network calls. So the business logic, what you would call, that's the logic for your app. Only that part gets shared, but then you can continue to write UI the way you would on your native apps.
Okay. So you can, and also you need to. So they're not really solving the same problem. So Kotlin multi-platform allows us to share business logic. So a lower level than Flutter allows us to have one set of UI, but it means we have to learn Flutter. So we have to learn something new.
Yeah.
So
So for Kotlin, for Android developers, Kotlin is something very familiar.
right.
Also, if you're a Swift developer, Kotlin is something that will look very familiar. Some concepts would be transferable. So even if you're someone new to Kotlin, it won't take you much time to get used to it. So it's, I would say, very easy to start working with it, both for the Android and iOS engineers.
Okay, that's exciting. So it actually sounds like you guys, we've got some really exciting coming into this new year changes in how we program for our mobile devices, and then also with Flutter, the promise is, I don't know if this is true with Kotlin multi-platform, but that it also works on web. Is that true with Kotlin multi-platform, that the business logic will also work on web?
Yeah, you can use the business logic anywhere. You just need to. So that's the beauty of it, right? You can use the technology that you would otherwise create, others use to create these UI components or the UI part of it. So that is completely left up to you how you want to do it. If you want to use HTML, CSS to create some sort of a website, or if you want to
Right.
create a native Mac app, whatever UI you want to create is up to you. Kotlin multi-platform just takes care of that common business logic, which you don't need to repeat.
Okay, this is interesting. And it's exciting from the raywenderlich.com standpoint because maybe how we're going to teach people to be new developers is going to be a bit different and a bit faster too. So
Yeah.
lots of exciting things to look forward to.
Lots of exciting things
Definitely.
for the upcoming year. Now we've got the upcoming holidays coming up this next weekend when we record this. And let me take you back to the Android app distribution, because now that you've had a deep dive in that technology, I'm going to put on my Santa beard and say, is there anything that you'd like to see made simpler or added to app distribution? Is there any kind of feature that you feel is missing? What would you add if you could?
Uh, So in terms of just releasing the apps, I would say that most things are already out there that we would need, but it would be better to have, I would say, clearer understanding of how uh, the Play Store works. Like for example, if you're creating a listing on the Play Store, you have to give a description, you have to write a lot about your app. Now, having an understanding of how different things affect your app, like for example, what are the terms you can use to, I would say, make a more effective Play Store listing? What keywords can you use? How should your screenshots look? There's still a lot of ambiguity out there, and companies are just experimenting with a lot of things to figure out how the Play Store works so that they can get a better ranking. If there was, I would say, a better understanding of how things work. Google is trying to do things around there to, I would say, conduct workshops to explain things to developers out there. But if people had more visibility into it, I would say it would make the entire experience way smoother.
And as somebody who has read extensively in that topic for the iOS App Store, absolutely. It's true on our side too, that to some extent it's a black box and you're just like, let's try this, let's try that, where can we stuff more keywords? What effect did it have? But yeah,
Mhm.
the more clarity, the better.
Yeah.
How do I advertise to get my app better seen, better known?
Right. And is it worth it? What, especially for indies, our budgets are tiny. So what if any advertising is really worth it?
What is this thing budget, you say?
Good one.
The money you were going to spend on that extra food, should you spend it on,
App.
Google keyword ads?
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's the list I have, Susanna. So what have you got?
I think, let me look.
Subhrajyoti, is there anything that you would like to talk about that we have missed?
I think you have covered almost everything about me and my journey. So the books, mentoring, the GDE thing, you've been pretty extensive about it.
As I've said, I really am in debt to Susannah for the research that she does in between shows. It almost makes it feel like I am not doing enough work on my own.
Oh, you're welcome, and it's fun, and I'm so appreciative that you're coming on and sharing all this. And there's all sorts of interesting things that we've covered in this and that are relevant to Android devs, I'm sure, but I think relevant to everybody interested in dev and improving as a dev,
Mhm.
So we're definitely going to include your personal website and we want to make sure we've got your Twitter correct in the show notes, because I bet your mentoring slots are going to get slammed after this.
We can only hope.
I'll open up more slots for the new year.
That's
right.
Because
really
it's a
cool.
pretty nice experience talking to different people, right? Like uh, mentoring, I would say, in a way, is not just about like helping the other person or assisting them, but you also get to learn a lot yourself.
Mhm.
Um, you might think you know a topic, but then when someone new to a topic comes to you and asks you questions, you find the gaps in your knowledge because they might have a completely different perspective to the same thing. You also, I would say, learn to appreciate different backgrounds people have in terms of coming into tech, or just people you might work with someday, the different kind of backgrounds people can come from, be it in terms of their education, in terms of their experiences. There is so much out there, and you get to see a part of it while talking to different people.
That's so cool. And I think, I hope that you feed that back into our raywunderlich.com ecosystem too, as people are asking things and you realize, wow, we aren't covering that really. So if there are things that people ask that we should have a tutorial about, or a course or a book.
Let's just drop more work in your lap.
Well, I
So,
mean, you can put out the ideas and somebody else will pick up the work sometimes. So
we actually do that. We have this thing called the Android Advisory Panel. I think I forgot to put that in my info. So, Ray Wenderlich has this panel called the Android Advisory Panel. It's consists of a few developers where we help figure out what are the different topics new books should be written on. Uh,
oh, good.
are there any things that we missed out on the books? That can be added. uh, our learning paths that we have around videos, tutorials, how up to date are they? Does something needs to be updated? Are they missing some components? So every month we look at each of these aspects like books, tutorials, video courses, and we try to figure out how up to date they are, whether they need updating. So it's something that we do as like based on our interactions with the community, we pitch in new topics that it would be nice to have a video course on this, book on this topic, or maybe this tutorials could be updated to include this new information. So that's also something that Ravendelic is trying to do by creating this panel.
Right on. Go us. And
Yep.
thanks for being on that. So, because
And
obviously if it was up to Drew and I, we'd just be like, okay, you should ask Subhrajyoti.
All right. I'm gonna go to the rollout. which is give me one split second. Everything contributes well with the Ray Wenderlich ecosystem, and it's a pleasure to have you as part of that ecosystem, contributing books and tutorials and video courses and everything else. Subhrajyoti, I really want to thank you for being on the show this week.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's been great talking to both of you.
Super fun talking to you.
You can find Subhrajyoti on Twitter at, let me see if I get this right, I am Subhrajyoti, IAMSUBHRAJYOTI.
Yeah.
Susannah is, of course, Suz Gupta, SUZGUPTA. I am Podcast Dru. Coming up in our next episode in 2 weeks, as we kick off the new year, we're going to bring back one more of our co-hosts. Alex Sullivan will be back, and we will be definitely talking about avocado toast. I don't know how I can express this enough that he tried to get me into it, and I did in fact try it by the end of that season. But the real treat, 2 weeks after that episode, we're going to have Paul Hudson on the show, Hacking with Swift himself. I'm looking forward to that. And if you have any questions for that episode for Paul, for us, please write us at podcast@raywenderlich.com. In the meantime, for my guest, Subhrajyoti Sen, for Susannah Gupta, and myself, Dru Freeman, we send things back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.